Ms. Andrews' conduct does not merit protection under the First Amendment. Principal Belding did not violate Ms. Andrews' constitutional rights because 1, her conduct does not constitute symbolic speech, and 2nd, because it was materially and substantially disruptive to the school learning environment. In accordance with the Spence test, Ms. Andrews' actions can only be labeled speech if 1, she is intended to convey a particularized message, and 2, if that message can be likely to be understood by others.
Does it have to be one message?
Can you phrase the question, Your Honor?
Does it have to be only one message?
One particularized message, yes.
So if it's more than one message, it's not protected?
Well, I believe it depends, Your Honor, because in Spence, even though the student was conveying multiple ideas, these ideas had a strong nexus or connection. And the student in Spence, when he hung the flag upside down with a peace sign, he did this in a pointed expression of anguish.
Well, but let me get back to the. Well, I didn't get your reference to Spence with regard to this. I'm not clear. If there's more than one message, is it protected speech?
No, Your Honor. It must be one particularized message.
Okay. In Spence, was it one?
Yes, Your Honor. However,
wasn't it Cambodia and Kent State?
Yes, Your Honor, but those ideas did have a strong nexus or connection that contributed to one particularized message of nonviolence or peace.
So if there can only be more than one message if they're related.
Yes, Your Honor, they must have a connection.
And where does it say that?
Can you phrase the question?
What court said that? What opinion said that they must be related?
Well, I believe in Spence, it didn't say they had to be related, but there has to be one particularized message. And in Spence, this court wrote that the student did have a particularized message because those ideas contributed to one particularized message of peace and nonviolence. However, in the case of Bar, Ms. Andrews had multiple motivations for her tuxedo. She could have been promoting her uncle's tuxedo shop, publicizing herself for a student body yearbook or for a student body campaign, or opposing Ms. Amber Green's yearbook problem. And these ideas aren't as connected as they were in Spence, and because of this court can infer that she had intent to convey a particularized message. These ideas didn't contribute to one particularized message. And also, in addition, Ms. Andrews never established what message she was trying to convey. This is different from Tinker, because the students had already met beforehand to determine that their armbands were going to oppose the Vietnam hostilities. Also, to pass the second problem of the Spence test, Ms. Andrews must be able to communicate her message in a way that's likely to be understood by others. This court has recognized that context is key in this. In Spence, the circumstances around the flag incident made it likely to those who saw the flag that they would understand the message. The student hung the flag only 6 days after the Kent State University killings. In addition, it was an issue of intense public concern. It was an unmistakable message.
Wouldn't the context be the same here in terms of her solidarity with Amber?
Well, I disagree, Your Honor, because the context at Hendricks High School was very different. Well, Your Honor, during the time, even though it's true that Ms. Andrews did feel strongly about Ms. Amber Green's yearbook problem, there's no indication in the record that showed anyone else shared her same concern. Also, it's very unlikely that people would classify a student's exclusion from the yearbook as an intense public concern. Also, during the time, student body elections were going on, and that is much more high profile than Ms. Amber Green's exclusion from the yearbook.
Would her campaigning for herself be protected speech?
Just campaigning for herself, Your Honor?
Yeah, and if she wore the tuxedo as a campaign device for her campaign for president, would that be protected speech?
Yes, I believe it would, Your Honor, but in this case, Ms. Andrews had multiple motivations for wearing her tuxedo. It couldn't have been to just promote her campaign, because the petitioner argues that she tried to convey a message of solidarity with Amber Green. Still, even if this, one of Ms. Andrews' classmates, Mr. Walter MacArthur, he sent her a text message asking her what the meaning of the tuxedo was. This indicates that those reading the message could not be likely to understand the message.
Doesn't that indicate that one could not understand the message?
Yes, Your Honor, but Mr. Walter MacArthur is the only person in the record that shows any indication of having any thoughts on Ms. Amber Green's tuxedo.
Can we conclude from that the rest of them all did understand? Because they didn't ask?
Can you phrase the question, Your Honor?
Well, you're suggesting that we because he's the only one who asked, he's the one who asked that nobody understood. Maybe he's the only one who didn't understand. How do we know?
Well, you don't know, Your Honor, but you can infer that people did understand the message. But you have to keep in mind that Walter MacArthur is the only person in the record that shows any indication of caring about Miss Andrew Green's tuxedo, and he did not know what the tuxedo meant. And even further, the only evidence that indicates that Miss Andrews was portraying a message is when she stood up at the assembly. She held up the yearbook saying, "See the big picture." However, this could have been taken multiple ways by the school. For example, the yearbook had just come out a few days earlier. People may have taken her holding up the yearbook as a way to promote yearbook sales. But the main reason is that this court can infer that Miss Andrews' message could be easily understood because of the context. Even if Miss Andrews' actions do satisfy the Spence test, this court has ruled that school officials may limit student speech if it is materially and substantially disruptive.
Counselor, but the only evidence on the record that this was a material and substantial disruption was the giggling and the note passing. Did that really rise to that standard?
Yes, Your Honor, because it materially and substantially interfered with the educational process, and it interfered with the learning.
What do you mean materially and substantial?
To be materially and substantially disruptive, Your Honor, Miss Andrews' tuxedo would have had to interfere with the school learning environment, and it did on multiple occasions. During the time when Miss Andrews wore her tuxedo, the school was subject to a pattern of disruptive behavior. On April 22nd, Miss Andrews' tuxedo was so disruptive that her chemistry teacher, Mr. Alvarez, had to stop the class to address it. This happened again the next day in her English class, and her teacher, Mr. George, had to stop the class on multiple occasions.
Counselor, is it that every time students pass notes in class, is it always a material and substantial disruption? Because students pass notes often, don't they, in school?
Well, Your Honor, even though students do pass notes a lot, that doesn't mean that the school doesn't have the power to stop that. Schools have an obligation to provide a strict and orderly learning environment. And Mr. Alvarez did say that kids were being kids, but just because kids disrupt school doesn't mean that the school should allow them to keep on disrupting school. In this case, school officials made the prudent decision in limiting Miss Andrews' speech and action.
However, by him saying that it was just kids being kids, doesn't that sort of allude to him believing that it didn't disrupt his ability to teach the course, which seems to be what Tinker is concerned with?
No, Your Honor, because Mr. Alvarez did say during class when Miss Andrews' tuxedo disrupted his class that even minor disruptions cannot be tolerated. But he said even minor disruptions cannot be tolerated. It doesn't mean that he is referring to Miss Andrews' tuxedo as a minor disruption. And even though Mr. Alvarez may have been, his motive may have been unclear, there are still other teachers who determined that Miss Andrews' tuxedo was disruptive. They had a meeting during lunch, and the majority of the teachers came to a consensus that Miss Andrews' tuxedo interfered with the learning environment.
I thought it sounded a little bit like viewpoint discrimination. They did reference cross-dressing. It didn't seem like a lot of them were talking about actual disruptions, more just not liking what she was doing.
I disagree, Your Honor, because that case would be very similar to Barber. In Barber, a student was wearing a t-shirt that depicted George Bush as a terrorist. This court ruled in favor of the students because they found that the teachers had undifferentiated fear. In this case, the teachers did not have undifferentiated fear. There had already been specific evidence that Miss Andrews' tuxedo had already disrupted the school learning process. Ms. Miller didn't just see Miss Andrews' tuxedo and send her to her principal's office. There had been specific evidence that Miss Andrews' tuxedo had already disrupted class on multiple occasions. And to determine disruption, this court should defer to teachers. Teachers are educational professionals. They're at the best place to determine what is disruptive and what is not. And at bottom, this case is about a school trying to preserve its learning environment. Regardless of whether or not Miss Andrews' tuxedo does constitute symbolic speech, a school's main purpose is to educate their kids, is to ensure learning. And Miss Andrews' tuxedo interfered with that learning process, and disruption cannot be tolerated. For foregoing reasons, this court should affirm the lower court's decision that Principal Belding acted appropriately in sustaining the school learning environment.